Hey, good morning, everybody. Jim Benton from Chorus. Thanks for joining us for the daily briefing. Today, I've got a special guest. I've got the CEO of Empire Selling, also the initial leader that kicked off LinkedIn Sales Navigator, some great work at Sprinkler, a rugby player, Dan Swift. Dan, how you doing today?
I'm very well. Thank you so much for having me on.
Yeah, it's great to kick off today. You're a little bit later in the day out in New Jersey. How are you holding up?
Holding up good, thank you. The kids have been homeschooled. My 2-year-old daughter is napping, so God willing, we get through this one without any interruptions. But I'm not promising anything.
That's great. I can hear the kids waking up, running down the hallway right now. It's a different world. Dan, I loved when I saw the mission of Empire Selling. The specific mission was to bring compassion, transparency, and trust back to the sales process. It only took a global pandemic to make that happen. I think it's amazing, but your relevance seems perfect.
Isn't that sad as well? Isn't that sad that we needed a pandemic to trigger something like this and for us all to start talking about this on social, on LinkedIn and all that good stuff? But yeah, it's true. We're doing what we can to help people out there.
Yeah, what are you seeing? What's different when you think about the compassion side? Something is different that I think we all hope really sticks. It must stick. What are you seeing out there?
So many things. I think one of the biggest ones is if you think about myself, right, as a potential customer for many people who might be listening to this. I'm working from home. Never worked from home before in 20 years. I obviously work full time. My wife works full time. We've got 2 little ones. We're homeschooling. So it's for salespeople trying to engage with me, and we talk a lot about leading with compassion and that good stuff. It's not just about what you say, it's how you approach someone like myself. And I
Mhm.
think there's been an evolution and a lot of interesting innovation around how sellers are looking to now engage with buyers, and also what buyers are open and how buyers are open to being engaged by sellers as well. So I think it's been kind of really interesting.
I think one of the data points that I wanted to get your perspective on sort of how we're engaging people. For the week, we had shown cold call dials are down since January, but up 7%. Connect rates are 10. As you're looking to build pipeline, as we're looking to execute, I think we're seeing some of the greatest sales execution in a decade right now. How are people engaging? What are you seeing out there?
Yeah, well, I mean, people are craving human interaction, right? So I think that's part of it. It's interesting. So I look at this kind of data around cold calls and just calls generally.
Yeah.
And I think there's other things that we're seeing, and certainly what we're teaching in terms of how to go and engage folks like me and others, right? Everyone else in the world who are sat at home just trying to get through the day. And my background, as you mentioned, right, I'm a LinkedIner. I launched a business for LinkedIn, for the social selling business. So I'm always going to teach about how to build and nurture your network and how you can leverage relationships to get walked into the door to people like me who are sat at home and who will take calls from people that they trust.
Yeah.
But I'm also seeing, and again, with a lot of what we're teaching, is teaching people to slow down, breathe, you know, go and look at what that company might be going through. Have their strategic initiative change? How much have they been impacted by the pandemic? Have they been furloughing tons of people? Or are they in growth mode? Is something about what's going on helping them? And then in terms of like how to reach out, again, slow down. Think about the person that you're actually sending this message to. Guess what? They're a human being, right? So well, let's talk about removing all the layers and
Yeah.
like, how do we actually engage with that individual as a human? And we're teaching a lot of video, right? We're spending hours and hours and hours on Zoom. So why are we not spending more time recording thoughtful video messages, leveraging all of what I've just described to go and engage people where we might not be able to
Yeah,
leverage
why
relationships?
aren't we? We know that video works so incredibly well. I've been a huge believer of it for quite a while now, but I still don't see a ton of video used in proposals
Mhm.
as a norm. What are you teaching out there, and how do we overcome that?
So before we get to like what do we teach and you think about just a human being being comfortable on a video, it's not something, you know, we're learning how to do more of that. And when you're recording a video one-to-one, it's hard. I remember the first one I did, and then I probably recorded 37 takes before the one I sent to my customer the first time more than a year ago I was okay with. So I think there's a behavioral thing. It's so different to what sellers have done before. Then it's a workflow thing. It's not the knee-jerk reaction
Yep.
to go to video. The knee-jerk reaction is to go to email or pick up the phone or whatever it might be. So there's that. And then it's how to use it, when to use it, can you overuse it for sure?
Yeah.
So there's all of those things to think through. And then, yeah, I mean, a lot of people think of video for prospecting. Sure, absolutely. But what about those scenarios that so many of us have when you connect with someone on LinkedIn and most salespeople then jump in immediately? Yeah, reason I want to chat with you is about XYZ, as opposed to recording a really thoughtful message for that person. Thank you for accepting my connection request on LinkedIn. The reason I wanted to chat with you is because of these different things that I saw in your corporate 10K, or some of the people that mentioned at company X that you and I should talk, or whatever it is. There's so much to unpack. And then video later on in the sales process for those, you have that proposal walkthrough, right?
Yeah.
And you've gone through that and you feel as though you've done a good job, but you know there's 8 to 10 people in the average B2B buying process. So other people will go get eyes on that proposal. So why not just do a quick video recap for those people that are going to want to look at it, and highlight the things that you want them to focus on who were not on the call,
We used to include a video intro to a proposal. It was kind of
Absolutely.
a play. And I remember, we'd keep it under a minute, but it was a
Yeah.
quick way to get either leadership in. But I was always surprised by, if you send that to people above the line, they forward it to just about everyone, saying, I wish my sales team did this. And your exposure is
totally. It's so true. And even so, we teach a lot about content as well. So Forrester recently talked in one of their reports about using atomized content. So what they're talking about is exactly the right content, right person, right time in their buying process, to all the different buying personas, different stages, all that good stuff. And you can use video, right, to explain why that buyer, why that recipient would benefit from reading that marketing asset, rather than just attach it to an email. And when there's that context and that thoughtful intro via email, and you introduce yourself human to human, then those open rates on that content, which then educates them on why they should even talk to you, becomes so powerful.
So powerful. And I know that we're using video to show that we're human versus automated right now. So the human to human side, but you still need to have a great message.
Totally.
The message first. Let me ask you about SDRs.
Mm-hmm.
From the stat that we were showing about cold calls down, given your background on the social side, what should SDRs, how should they connect? What's the type of message when you're using social that resonates? We see a lot of the same type of message that can be noisy on social. What works out there today? What's authentic?
Yeah, so always leading with something human, right? And it's easy to say, but it might be that economic buyer at that target company has been on a podcast, has been in the news, has just shared something on LinkedIn that she has shared for a reason. And not mentioning one of those things is a massive miss. And then obviously keeping that value statement relevant and short, because we don't want to be scrolling down through anything. If we stay on video less than 30 seconds, because sadly we live in a world where attention span is just not what it could or should be, myself included. And but then also just on messages as well, as an SDR, I just wish the wheels could again just slow down a little bit, because you think about what the role of an SDR is. He or she is mapped to a subset of accounts within that organization's target market. And that subset of accounts only has 8 to 10 people in the average B2B buying process. So imagine an SDR is supporting four AEs. Each AE has 25 accounts. That's 100 accounts. There's 1,000 people that SDR should be able to approach in a 12-month period. So let's prioritize that. Let's map those 1,000 people to your own network, to your company's network, to your extended network, to your board's network, to your private equity group's network, and then let's get walked in the door to that low-hanging fruit first. I mean, as an SDR, I would be all over that.
I think you're right. I mean, look, the SDRs are the scouts of today's day. There's 35 million businesses, 200 million people to contact, and how lucky are you? It's like a lightning bolt striking to get one of our people, your people, my people, other people's teammates, to actually get on a call or to reach out on LinkedIn. And that's the magic right now. And I think that mentality of feeling like you're giving someone a gift of connecting amazing solutions to them is so critical.
Yeah. And I just hope, in terms of learnings off the back of this whole thing that we've gone through, I just hope a lot of companies do reflect and do look at what they were doing prior and do slow down and do give their people maybe just look at the way that they've been performance managing and the metrics they're having people go after. Because, you know, we still talk to some companies who are saying, do 100 calls a day. And it's like, well, okay, but let's talk conversion rates versus let's ask for 20 people for introductions into their networks to economic buyers, and let's see what the conversion rates are there. And I'm not saying replace old with new overnight. I'm saying let's test things. Let's take a hybrid approach. Yeah, got some cool data here, I see.
Yeah, I'd love to get your thoughts on the coaching side. There's, especially as we talk about compassion and you talk about changing things up, the stat that we shared this week is around managers just taking significantly more actions coaching. This is using Chorus data across the market right now. But the interesting thing I shared yesterday is that we're seeing more coaching than even pre-COVID right now. So even from a work at home environment, people are engaging. What advice do you have to leaders today who are working through this period? How should they be coaching?
I think they should have been coaching in the way I'm about to describe before the pandemic, right? So we only have X number of at-bats. So there's coaching for how are you going to have that conversation? When you get that buyer on the call, like you should have the experience as the manager or the leader, right? So what are the likely things that these people are going to say and how are we going to handle that? Let's role play that conversation and then let's go through it again. Let's make sure we're clean on that. Those are the kind of things that I think about when it comes to coaching. But then there's also coaching in terms of how are you using your time each week? And again, it's an interesting thought process, because I think a lot of managers might look at the 9 to 5 window, right, as the work time. But then there's coaching where a lot of SDRs are really productive and successful doing stuff in the evenings. And because that's maybe how their brain works and where they're most productive. And that should be okay, as long as they hit the desired performance metrics that company has. And then there's all sorts of, as we know, scheduling tools. They can craft all the messages. They can hit those economic buyers at 6:30, 7 o'clock in the morning with the right messages, the videos, whatever it is. But there's coaching the SDRs on how best to use their time and being okay when an SDR comes to you and says, I've been trying this and it's working. So do we want to look at that and maybe play that out across the team and see if there's some opportunity there? You know, there's just got to chat to them, you know, learn from them.
The human to human side. Dan, you mentioned that you've been an office person. I've been an office person before all this. As you've worked with other leaders right now who had teams and offices, what are some of the insights you're hearing about how they've adjusted to work from home and maybe some of the benefits that might stick going forward?
So it's an interesting one. A couple of different ways of answering the question. So from a day perspective, I think about what I have to deal with, right? So my son does school 10, 11 o'clock in the morning. So we have to know what our people are going through. We have to know what their schedules are. We need to make sure that we are scheduling those weekly sales meetings and those one-on-ones that actually work for the recipient, the individual. Because your team are going to accept those meetings a lot of the time when they really want to say that is the worst time that I could have a one-on-one. So you've got to ask them, like, talk to me about your routine, your days, what you're seeing, those kind of things. So I think that's really important, to get to know your people and see what they're doing and schedule accordingly. And then the other thing in terms of what are we seeing in terms of changes is we're seeing a lot of companies, we talk a lot about everyone's in sales. We're seeing a lot of companies actually really living and breathing that now through our guidance. Because if we can look at, let's say, the 10 deals that are in the hopper for the quarter. And if we can then work as a team of 8 AEs and a leader to look at those deals in the hopper for the quarter to see, okay, well, where could they get unstuck? Who do we know? What action might we be able to take to progress a deal forwards? Those are the kind of things that we're seeing a lot more of. And also giving the SDRs and the AEs the confidence to look more broadly across the organization. And it's okay to reach out to an executive and say, hey, I see, John, I've been trying to get a meeting with him. Can you introduce me? That's okay.
Speaking of that executive side, I think that's been a big area that we've been focusing on. I'm still quite amazed by the data, both on the sales side, we're seeing a significant increase in sales leadership joining calls, as well as on the buyer side. They're huge increase week over week. How should teams be prepping for these? And how is this changing these calls?
So prepping for these, this is where leaders are going to want to naturally jump in and take over calls and try and do everything themselves. At least the not so good leaders are going to do that. The really good leaders are going to set their sellers up for success. So they will prep for these calls. They will role play for these calls. They'll make sure understand roles and responsibilities. The AE or the SDR will know when to bring that leader into the conversation, what their role is going to be. So there's a lot of conversation and planning that is taking place more. And I think it's teaching those sellers how to leverage their managers, and managers have to learn for the individual. They have to learn that the longer term success for these people is to give them the skills to be able to have these conversations themselves, not to keep jumping in and taking over and closing the deal. And it's going to work in the short term, but not. And people will get fed up of that, and they'll start leaving and going to companies where they can get what they need and are able to do the job that they're employed to do. So you just got to be a little careful with that.
I think it's right. I think that it's easy as you get into these leadership roles and you're pulled into a call, you're very relaxed. It's different than when you were running point on either as an AE. And I think that relaxed is how you build trust. It's interesting, but it steals the energy from the AE. I'm with you 100%. The AEs need to start and own the call and build that human connection first and foremost.
Totally.
They need to drive it and just layer in leadership. Leadership should be speaking. They shouldn't be silent on these calls. That'd be a real miss.
Well, that's the other thing as well, right? Where so often we hear that that leaders are on those calls, but they don't have a defined role. I had it myself so many times in my previous role prior to Empire, and I'd be wheeled into these big meetings as the executive at Sprinkler or the executive at LinkedIn. And I wasn't given a role to play, and it was uncomfortable for me. It was uncomfortable for the people that we were speaking to or pitching or whatever it was. And it just a waste of everyone's time. So it's making sure that it's even a good use of time to have a leader on there. That's the other thing.
Yeah.
Maybe it's not.
It's an interesting shift because people think when leaders join, they'll on the call. But as you just mentioned, I've seen it in my past. Sometimes sales wants to prove in a great way. I mean, I support that they're on it, that they're running it. And what can happen is the leader doesn't have any airtime and everyone's thinking, wait a second, we'd love to hear a little more. And I think you're right. It's about getting that right balance between the two.
Yeah. And also as well, I've seen so many times in my career where you're running so fast as a sales organization and you haven't slowed down to plan, and then you jump on a call. Or maybe you have 30 seconds before, which is like, what are we doing? Who is it? What are we talking about? What have you said before? Okay, got it, I think. And it's like, no, you haven't got it at all because you haven't given yourself enough time to know all the details. And then the buyer feels that. The buyer knows that, they know that you're scrambling, and there's, the buyer's thinking, I've already told your seller this, so you should know that, leader. Why are you asking me the same question that I've already answered? It's just clunky. And then one other thing on that thought process is, if a buyer feels as though your sales process is clunky, think about how they're going to feel about once they become a customer. What is the customer experience going to be like? Clunky, right? So, so you've really got to nail that down.
I love it, Dan. One last question, just as we part. You've got a great energy. I love the way you're looking at this. You've mentioned slow down a few times. Any personal approaches that you use, or any advice to others that are looking for how to slow down right now?
Breathe. Take a moment. Literally, it's so funny that when you actually do take a second and breathe, everything gets reframed. But then also just reminding yourself, it's that whole big rock and sand, mentality. We all, whatever job we're doing, we all have these big rocks that we have to execute against. And it's so easy to let those things that just don't matter, just don't move the needle, slip into your day. And before you know it, you've done nothing to tackle those big rocks. And for the people who are listening on the call, who might be AEs or SDRs who are prospecting, that's what I would be thinking about. Like, all that you need to be doing if your job is to do that is that. But are you doing it in a structured, thoughtful way, or are you letting other things creep into your day? And know your conversion rates, know what matters, know all the tactical things you need to do, but that's your job. Nothing else matters. And then win there, and then move on to your next stage in your career, but know what your rocks are to be successful in that role as well.
I love it. Bring human back, as you mentioned.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Dan, appreciate it. Thanks for kicking Wednesday off. I hope you have a great rest of the day.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
All right. Cheers.
Bye-bye.